Section 9 of Abe and Mawruss. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Abe and Mawruss. Being Further Adventures of Potash and Perlmutter by Montague Glass. Chapter 6. A Present for Mr. Geigerman, Part 2. Admitting I'm only your partner, Morris, Abe began, as Morris entered the showroom a few minutes later. Don't I gotta eat too? And in the second place, Morris, if you gotta make a hog of yourself, do it at dinner time at home. Because when a fella takes up a whole hour having his lunch, Morris, he naturally stuffs himself so full that he ain't no good for the rest of the day. A lump in Morris's throat, which may or may not have been the tongue sandwich, prevented him from replying. But at last he swallowed it, and after removing his hat and coat, he carefully unfolded the paper. "Don't hurry out to lunch, Abe," he said. "I could save you money. I got something to tell you which could take away your appetite so you wouldn't even want a cup of coffee." Abe paused with his hands on the hat rack. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "I mean, I'm eating only a tongue sandwich and a cup of coffee in Hammersmith's just now," Morris went on. "And who should I see at the next table but Louis Kleinman of Kleinman and Ellenbogen. That's a dirty low life, that fella, Abe. A cutthroat like him should be making money in business. Honestly, Abe, when I see a decent, respectable fella like that—" "Say, looky here, Morris," Abe said. "Let me go to my lunch, will you? I'm hungry." "Hungry, sagte," Morris retorted. "A fella makes a god of his stomach. You understand, this business is nothing at all. For all you care, Abe, our whole trade could fail on us now so long as you could eat. Everybody says the same thing. The fella's the—" "Do me the favor, Morris," Abe begged. "Tell me about it afterward. All I'm eating for my breakfast is one egg, so sure as you're standing there." "All right, Abe, I wouldn't keep you no longer," Morris said. "If you got it in your heart to eat when one of your best customers is busting up on you, go ahead." "Our best customer!" Abe cried. "Mandelberger Brothers and Company." "Get weg, you fool!" Morris exclaimed angrily. "Why should a millionaire concern like Mandelberger Brothers and Company gotta fail? You talk like a lunatic." Once more Abe seized his hat. "I got enough of your nonsense, Morris," he said, starting for the elevator. "Wait!" Morris cried, grabbing him by the arm. "Did you ship any goods to Felix Geigerman yet?" "Felix Geigerman?" Abe repeated. "Is that the fella?" Morris nodded, and this time Abe hung up his hat and sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "Who says he's going to fail?" he asked. "Everybody says so," Morris replied. "Even in the papers they got it." He handed Kleinman's paper to Abe and indicated the paragraph with a shaking forefinger. "Where does it say he's going to fail?" Abe asked, after he read it over hastily. "Where does it say it?" Morris cried. "Why, if a fella goes to work and pays $3,000 for a fiddle, Abe, while he only got a business rated 25 to 30,000 credit fair, ain't it as plain as a nose on your face he must gotta fail?" Once more Abe read over the paragraph, and then the paper fell from his hands to the floor. "Why, Morris," he gasped, "it says here he's paying $3,000 for an Amati, which he had in his possession for some time. That must be the very fiddle which he's playing on with Mo Rabiner." "Might serve us if it is or it ain't," Morris commented. "What difference does that make to us, Abe?" Abe's face was white, and large beads of perspiration stood out on his forehead as he replied. "The difference ain't much, Morris," he said slowly. "Only if Felix Geigerman pays $3,000 for the fiddle, which he already got it, and we are giving him for nothing another fiddle, which is the self-same identical article, Morris, then we are out $3,000, and that's all the difference it makes to us." For 2 minutes Morris regarded his partner with a glassy stare. "Do you mean to tell me, Abe, that there fiddle which you bought it from Shellac is the same identical article that Geigerman pays $3,000 for?" Abe nodded. "You couldn't tell the difference between them, Morris," he declared. Even inside the label's the same name and everything. Morris took off his hat and coat methodically and hung them up on the rack. "So, Abe," he commenced, "you are giving to a schnorrer like Geigerman a genuine Who's This violin which it's worth $3,000? "How should I know it's worth 3,000?" Abe said. "Everybody knows that one of them genuine fellas' violins is worth $3,000, Morris thundered. "I'm surprised to hear you should talk that way." "Shellac didn't know it, for one," Abe interrupted. "Otherwise, why should he sell to us $125 a fiddle worth $3,000? "What should a greenhorn like Shellac know about such things?" Morris said. "Don't you fool yourself, Morris. If Shellac finds out he's getting $125 for a fiddle worth $3,000, he's got gumption enough to sue us in the courts yet. Don't you forget it." "Why should he sue us, Abe?" Morris asked. "A bargain is a bargain, ain't it?" "Sure, I know, Morris, but I told the fellow the fiddle wasn't genuine, you understand, when all the time I knew it was genuine." "Might you're mistaken, maybe, Abe," Morris broke in. "Might the fiddle ain't genuine." "What do you mean, ain't genuine? I'm telling you, the label was inside, and even the lot number's the same." "The lot number?" "Sure, the lot number. 1670, I think it was. And the only thing for us to do, Morris, is we should fix up some scheme to get that fiddle back from Geigerman, and that's all there is to it." "Well, go ahead, Abe," Morris said. "Go ahead and see him this afternoon." For the third time, Abe put on his hat. "First and foremost, I would go out and get a bite to eat, Morris," he said. "What good would it do me to get the fiddle back if I would die from starvation first?" Although the manufacturers of mechanical piano players had never solicited Felix Geigerman's photograph for half-tone reproductions in the advertising section of anybody's magazine, he dressed as though he expected the immediate arrival of the man with the camera. That is to say, he wore his hair after Mahler, while Holman and Moritz Rosenthal contributed to the pattern of his mustache. Moreover, he assumed a Paderewski tuft, a rolling collar that exposed the points of his right and left clavicles, a Windsor tie, and to preserve the unity of his characterization, a slight, nondescript foreign accent, despite the circumstance that he was born in Newark, New Jersey. All this, however, was not an idle pose on Felix's part. He merely applied to a dry goods store the business principles of the successful virtuoso, and he had found them so efficacious that personally he sold more garments than any 6 of his clerks. He was no less astute in the buying end of the business, for in pitting Sammet Brothers, Klinger and Klein, and Potash and Perlmutter against one another, he not only secured better terms of credit, but he found that it materially added to the quality of their garments. Thus, had Abe but known it, his $750 order proceeded not from the gift of the violin, but from the circumstance that the velvet suits had sold like hotcakes, and when he entered the 125th Street store that afternoon, Felix greeted him effusively. He wanted that second order badly, and if cordiality could accelerate its shipment, he was willing to try it with Abe. "Ah, mon ami," he cried, "come inside my office. What good wind blows you here?" Abe scowled. All this enthusiasm betokened but one thing. The violin was a genuine Amati, after all. He sat down slowly and bit the end off of a large cigar. "The fact is, Felix," he began, "for myself, I don't care, you understand, but you know Morris Perlmutter, what a crank that feller is, Felix, and so I'm coming up here to ask you something for a question." "Fire away, Abe. You couldn't faze me none," Felix replied in the accents of Newark, New Jersey. "Well, Felix, it's like this," Abe went on. "If we would be selling goods to J.B. Morgan, you understand, and Morris here, he is buying for $8 a fur overcoat, understand me, he right away would want another statement." Felix nodded. "Nowadays, you can't be too cautious," he agreed. So this morning in the paper, Abe continued, Mawruss reads you're buying for $3,000 a fiddle, and— But Abe, Felix interrupted, it was a genuine Amati. Sure, I know, Abe said, but yesterday I myself am bringing you a genuine Amati, and I didn't pay such a figure for it. Felix looked carefully at Abe's stolid face for some gleam of humor, and then he broke into a fit of laughter so violent that Abe suspected it to be a trifle forced. All right, Felix, he grumbled. Maybe you think this is a joke, but just the same, I'm telling you, I paid for that fiddle only $200. Felix stopped laughing and wiped his eyes. Well, I'm sorry, Abe, he said seriously. A fella should never look a gift horse in the teeth, Abe, but that fiddle ain't worth a cent more than $100 at the outside. Do you mean to say it ain't a genuine Amati? Abe asked angrily. Well, I don't mean to say anything, Abe, Felix began, but there are Amatis and Amatis. Some of them are worth little fortunes, and others are very ordinary-like. Say, looky here, Felix, Abe cried. Don't fool with me. Either that fiddle is or ain't a genuine Amati, ain't it? Felix paused. He wanted those velvet suits badly, and it began to look as though there would be a delay in the shipment. What is all this leading to, Abe? He began pleasantly. If there's anything troubling you, speak right up, and I'll try to straighten it out. Abe shifted his cigar in his mouth and made the plunge. What's the use of beating bushes around, Felix? He said. Yesterday I'm giving you a fiddle, ain't it? Inside it says the fiddle is a genuine Amati. What? Shone good. If that fiddle is a genuine Amati, it is worth $3,000, ain't it? Because if it ain't, then you are stuck with the other fiddle which you bought it. And if it's worth $3,000, then we are stuck by giving you the fiddle, ain't it? So that's the way it goes. Felix nodded. It was a delicate situation, in which his credit and the shipment of the suits seemed to be imperiled. To declare flatly that Abe's gift was a bogus Amati might offend him seriously, while to admit that it was genuine, but only worth $100, was to foster Abe's notion that he, Felix, had wasted $3,000 on a similar violin. I want to tell you something, Abe, he began at last. There's nothing to this business of selling goods by making presents, and I, for one, don't believe in it. So I'll tell you what I'll do. Come up here to the store tomorrow morning, and I'll get the fiddle from my house and give it back to you. Abe's scowl merged immediately into a wide grin. I don't want the fiddle back, Felix, he said, but my partner, you understand? He's the one which is always— Say no more, Abe, Felix cried. All I want is you should ship that order and tell your partner, if he's scared I'm spending my money foolishly, he can have a new statement whenever he wants it, and I'll swear to it on a truckload of Bibles. When Abe returned to his place of business that afternoon, he expected to find Morris pacing up and down the showroom floor, the picture of distracted anxiety. Instead, he was humming a cheerful melody as he piled up two-piece velvet suits. Well, Abe, he said, you have went on a fool's errand, ain't it? What do you mean, fool's errand? Abe demanded. Why, I mean I knew all along that fiddle of yours was a fake. And anyhow, Abe, I see Milton Strauss of Clipman, Strauss and Blymer, and what do you suppose he told it me, Abe? Abe shrugged angrily. If you must got to get it off your chest before I tell you what Geigerman told me, Morris, he said, go ahead. Well, I seen Milton Strauss, Abe, Morris went on calmly, and he says to me that he knows for a positive fact that Felix Geigerman could have sold that fiddle of his for $3,500 before he even pays for it yet. Strauss says that Felix is all the time buying up fiddles for a sideline, and if he makes a cent at it, he makes a couple of $1,000s a year. Furthermore, Abe, he says that if anybody's got a genuine Who's This fiddle, he wouldn't let it go for no $125, and the chances is you're paying a fancy figure for a cheap popular price line of fiddles. Abe hung up his hat so violently that he nearly knocked a hole in the crown. In the first place, Morris, he began, it was your idea I should go up there and get the fiddle back. And in the second place, I'm telling you, with my own eyes, I seen that fiddle, and it's the self-same identical article, name, lot number, and everything, which that fella Geigerman refuses $3,500 for. He scowled at his partner in anticipation of a cutting rejoinder. But anyhow, that ain't neither here nor there, he continued, as Morris remained silent. We would quick find out for ourselves where that fiddle really is, because tomorrow morning I'm going around to the store and Geigerman gives me the fiddle back. Morris paused in the folding of a velvet skirt. I wouldn't do that, Abe, if I was you, he said. What's the use of giving presents and taking them back again? You can make a feller an enemy for life that way. Sure, I know, Morris. An enemy for life is one thing, Morris, but $3,500 ain't to be sniffed at either, you understand? Schmooze, Abe, Morris cried. The fiddle ain't worth even 3,500 pins. Following this observation, there ensued a controversy of over an hour's duration, at the end of which Morris compromised. Say, listen here to me, Abe, he declared. You say that fiddle is worth it, and I say it ain't. Now, if I'm right and we take the fiddle back, then we're acting like a couple of cheap yokels, ain't it? But if you're right, Abe, then we are out $3,500. So what's the use of talking, Abe? Only one thing we got to do. We got to find a fella which he could right away tell whether the fiddle is or is not genuine just by looking at it. You understand? This fella, we got to send up to Geigerman's house to look at the fiddle tonight yet. And if he says the fiddle is Abe, then we would take it back. And if he says the fiddle isn't Abe, then Geigerman would keep the fiddle unfertig. Abe nodded slowly. The idea's all right, Morris, he said. But in the first place, Morris, where could we find such a fella? And in the second place, if we did find him, Morris, what excuse would we give Geigerman for sending him up there in the third place? Morris scratched his head. Well, for that matter, Abe, if we found such a fella, we could send him up there to say that he hears from you that you're giving away such a whoozer's fiddle to Geigerman and that the fellow would like to buy it off of him. And then, Morris? Abe asked. And then, Morris went on, Geigerman shows the feller the fiddle, you understand, and if it is worth it, or it isn't worth it, the fellow says nothing to Geigerman, but he comes back and reports to us. Abe nodded again. If I was to tell you all the weak points of that scheme, Morris, he said, I could stand here talking till my tongue dropped out yet, but all I got to say is, Morris, the idea's yours. Go ahead and carry it out. Me, I got nothing to say about it, either one way or the other. At 7 that evening, while Professor Ladislav Chelak was washing down a late breakfast with a bottle of beer, there came a violent knocking at the hall door. The professor answered it in person, for Aaron was busily engaged over Conconi's vocalizations in the front parlor, and the other members of the family were washing dishes in the rear. "New landsman!" Ladislaw cried. "Ain't you working tonight?" The newcomer was none other than Emil Pilz, Concertmeister of the Palace Theatre of Varieties, if that dignified term may be applied to the first violin of an orchestra of 20. "I am and I ain't," Emil replied. "I've got a job, Louis, which would take me till 9 o'clock, so be a good fella and substitute for me at the theaters till I'm coming back." "And who would substitute for me, Emil?" the professor asked. "That's all right," Emil replied. "I stopped in on my way over and I seen old man Hubai. He ain't shicker yet, so I told him he should go over and fiddle a couple at Sardis till you come, and to tell you the boss he got a Magenwehr and would be a little late. Me, I'm going uptown to look at a fiddle. I got the job through an old pupil, Milton Strauss, which he says a fella by the name Potash gives away a fiddle which he bought, and now he thinks it's a genuine Amati. So I should please go up and look at it, and if it is or it isn't, I got $10. "Who's this fella Potash?" the professor asked, and Emil shrugged. "What difference does it make?" he said. "He gives me $125 for the fiddle only a couple of days ago. What do you want to know for?" "Oh, nothing," the professor replied. "Only my brother Aaron sold to a feller by the name Potash the other day a fiddle, which I myself bought from old Hubai a couple of years ago for $15 yet. And if that's the one you're talking about, Emil, you should go quick up to the theater and forget about it because, Emil, if that fiddle is an Amati, you are Kabelic and I'm Chrysler. Sure, I know, Louis, Emil agreed. But just the same, I gotta go up there to make the 10. So if you do me the favor and spiel for me till 9:30, you can get anyhow $3 of it. I'm willing, the professor said, and 10 minutes later he was on his way up to the Palace Theater of Varieties. It was precisely 9:30, while a tabloid drama in progress on the stage rendered the presence of the orchestra unnecessary, that Emil Pilz returned. "Nu, Emil," Louis said, as they stood in the corridor leading to the stage entrance, "did you see the Amati?" He grinned in humorous anticipation of Emil's answer. "Yes, I did seen it," Emil replied, "and it is very elegant, grand model." "Sure," the professor said, "made in Bavaria with an axe." "Don't you fool yourself, Louis," Emil retorted. "It's an elegant instrument from Niccolo Amati's best period. If it's worth a cent, it's worth $3,000. "Schmooze, Emil!" Louis cried. "What are you trying to do, kid me?" "What do you mean, kid you?" Emil asked. "I should never stir from this spot, Louis, if it ain't an Amati. It's got a tone like gold, Louis." For a brief interval, Louis stared at his informant. "Do you mean to tell me, Emil, that the fiddle is a real genuine Amati?" "Listen here to me, Louis," Emil declared. "If I wouldn't be sure that it was a genuine, why should I go to such a heart that I would act this way to that fellow Potash? When so sure as you're standing there, Louis, when I told him it was a genuine Amati, he pretty near got a fit already. And as for his partner by the name of Perlmutter, he hollered that I thought he was going to spit blood already." Louis licked his dry lips before making any reply. "So then I'm paying $15 for a fiddle, which is a genuine Amati," he said, "and that brother of mine, which he ain't got no more sense, is a lunatic, lets it go for a song already." "Well, I couldn't stop to talk to you now, Louis," Emil said. "I must got to get on the job. I'm going to be tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, at here Potash and Perlmutter's. If you want, you could meet me there with old man Hubai." "Old man Hubai? What's he got to do with it?" "He's got a whole lot to do with it, Louis," Emil said. "A fellow like him sells you a $3,000 violin for $15, which he ain't got a penny in the world, you understand, and I should stand by and see him get done?" Professor Chelak hung his head and blushed. "Also, Louis," Emil concluded, "I just rung him up at the cafe, and he says whatever he gets out of it, I get half." When Morris Perlmutter arrived at Felix Geigerman's store the next morning, he showed the effects of a restless night and no breakfast, for he had found it impossible either to eat or sleep until he had his hands on the violin. "Mr. Geigerman went out for a minute, Mr. Potash," a floor walker explained, "but he said I should show you right into his office, Mr. Potash." "My name ain't Potash," Morris replied. "That's my partner, which he couldn't get up here on account he's sick." "That's all right," the floor walker said reassuringly. "Just step this way." He conducted Morris to Geigerman's office. "Have a seat, Mr. Perlmutter," he said. But the words fell on deaf ears, for as soon as he entered the room, Morris descried the violin, which rested on top of Geigerman's desk. He pounced on it immediately, and turning it over in his hand, he examined it with the minutest care. At length he discerned the label inside the F-hole. It was curling away from the wood and appeared to be ready to drop off, so that it was an easy matter for Morris to impale it on his scarf pin. By dint of a little scraping, he managed to draw one edge of it through the F-hole, and the next moment he was examining the faded printing. Then he turned the label over, and in one corner he discovered an oval mark. Simultaneously the door opened, and Geigerman entered. Morris thrust the label into his pocket and turned to Geigerman with an amiable smile. Moreover, his pallor had given place to a pronounced flush, and he looked nearly 5 years younger than when he walked into the store just 10 minutes before. "Hello, Felix," he cried, holding out his hand. "How's the boy?" "Fine," Felix said. "Where's Abe?" "He couldn't get here on account he's sitting up late again last night. And, of course, Felix, he's sick. But anyhow, Felix, I'm glad he ain't coming." "Why so?" Felix asked. "Because you never seen such a feller in your life, Felix," Morris went on. "Always worrying and always kicking. First he gives you a fiddle, then he wants to take it back again. With me it's different. What do I care if the fiddle is or ain't one of them genuine who's this? Once you give a thing, you give a thing, ain't it? I don't care what experts say, no nothing." Felix Geigerman blushed. When Emil Pilz had called on him the night before, he had scented the object of the visit and had exhibited not Abe's gift, but the Kuranyi Amadi. He had no doubt that Pilz communicated to Potash and Perlmutter the result of his call immediately after its conclusion, and he felt touched and humbled by Morris's generous behavior. "Morris," he said, "I did you a big injury. I didn't think you felt that way about it. So when that expert called on me last night, I didn't show him Abe's fiddle at all. I showed him the other one, the $3,000 fiddle." Morris's grin became a trifle broader. "That don't worry me none, Felix," he declared. "I'm glad you should keep the fiddle, if it should be worth $10,000 even. A gift is a gift, Felix." "That's very generous of you, Morris, I must say," Felix replied. "And I would keep the violin. I would even do more, Morris. I was going to give Klinger & Klein an order for some of the three-piece broadcloths, but I changed my mind. I will give it to you instead. And if you be in this afternoon, Morris, I'll go downtown and pick him out." Once more, Morris wrung his customer's hand. Before proceeding downtown, he sought the nearest dairy restaurant and made tremendous inroads upon its stock of eggs and coffee. It was almost 10 o'clock before he reached his place of business, and as he stepped out of the elevator, he was greeted by a roar of voices, approximating the effect of a well-managed mob scene in a capital and labor drama. Old Man Hubai stood in the middle of the showroom, and with clenched fists waving in the air, he appealed to heaven to witness that he was a poor man and spoke nothing but the Hungarian tongue. Hence he was at the mercy of such ruffians as Pilz and Chelak, whose right name he averred to be Kuhn. Following this, he swore by his mother that he had paid 1,000 kronen for the violin and da capo from the exposition of his poverty. Simultaneously, Professor Ladislaw Chelak dwelt on the economic aspect of the matter. In stentorian tones, he declared Abe's purchase of the violin to be another example of capital sitting upon the neck of labor, and he prophesied the rapid approach of the social revolution with sundry references to bloodsuckers, cutthroats, and Philistines. Emil Pilz, Aaron, and Abe Potash himself added to the general din in a three-cornered discussion of the legal points involved. Emil contended that Aaron could reprimand the violin upon the ground of Abe's misrepresentation at the time of the purchase, and Abe denied it in Yiddish and English, with emphatic profanity in both languages. Into this melee Morris hurled himself with a resounding "Kush! Are you all crazy or what?" he demanded. "Well," Abe cried, "where is it?" Instantly there was a dead silence, and all eyes rested on Morris. "Where's what?" Morris asked. "The Amadi," Emil Pilz cried, and Morris laughed out loud. "Get weg," he said. "You're an expert." Pilz shook his head in a bullying fashion. "Never mind if I'm an expert or not," he said. "Where is that Amadi which I seen it myself at Geigerman's house only last night?" "It is at Geigerman's house today," Morris replied. "Right now it is there, and it would stay there too, young fella, because that fiddle which you seen it is one of the Geigerman paid $3,000 for. You seen the wrong fiddle, that's all." This statement seemed to rouse Aaron Shellac to a hysterical frenzy. "Liar and thief!" he screamed. "Give me my fiddle!" "One moment, Shellac," Morris said. "Before you put on your hat and coat and go home, which you shouldn't trouble yourself to come back at all, I want to show you something." He explored his waistcoat pocket. "Ain't this the label which was in your fiddle?" he asked, handing Aaron a slip of paper. Aaron examined it carefully and nodded. "That other crazy Indian over there," Morris continued, pointing to the professor. "Look at this label. Ain't it the same which was in the fiddle?" Ladislaw Chelak examined the printed slip, and he too nodded. Next, Morris turned to Old Man Hubai, who stood apart, muttering to himself. "Someone ask that old greenhorn if it's the same label that was in the fiddle. I don't know what he's got to do with this business, but he may know anyhow." Chelak interpreted Morris's words and showed the label to the old man, who replied volubly in Hungarian. "He says he thinks it is," the professor said, "but he doesn't know for sure." "Well, I know it's the same," Morris retorted, "because I took it out there myself this morning." Here Morris cleared his throat and assumed an air of such dignity, not to say majesty, that to Abe it seemed as though he had never rightly known his partner until that moment. "Now, look on the other side of the label," Morris cried. Once more the label went the rounds, and after Emil Pilz had examined it, he put on his hat and made for the elevator. Almost on tiptoe, Professor Ladislaw Chelak followed him, while Aaron repaired to the cutting room and packed up his belongings, preparatory to forsaking a career as a cutter for one of music. At length only Old Man Hubai remained. "What are you waiting for?" Morris demanded. "Me, poor man," Hubai said. "Me no got car fare. Me no got trinkgeld. Me no got nothing." Morris handed him a quarter, and he shuffled off toward the back stairs. Meantime, Abe staggered to his feet and passed his hand over his forehead. "Tell me, Morris," he said, "what's this all about?" "It's just what I says just now, Abe," Morris exploded. "That expert seen the wrong fiddle. The fiddle you gave Gargamin is no more 300 years old than I am." "Why ain't it?" Abe asked. For answer, Morris handed him the label. On the obverse side, Abe read the inscription: "Nicholas Amati Cremonensis, Facibai, Anno 1670. "Now turn it over," Morris said, and Abe described on the reverse side a familiar oval mark bearing the following inscription: "Allied Printers Trade Council, Union Label, New York City." End of section 9.